Here we are in the midst of the book of Numbers, deep in the Israelite experience of the wilderness. Anyone who reads the Torah and thinks about the wilderness experience, even for a moment, you'll notice that it's characterized by complaint and crisis and ongoing desperation to go back to Egypt, back to Mitzrayim, back to the narrow place. Ironically, yearning for Mitzrayim as a place of safety and abundance. Like, for example, in Numbers 14, the Israelites say, "We remember the fish that we used to eat for free in Egypt." What? The cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, the garlic. זכרנו את הדגה, אשר נאכל במצרים חינם, את הקישואים, את האבטחים, את החציר, את הבצלים ואת השומים. So vivid, so specific, so crazy, such craving, such yearning to get out of the wilderness, such yearning for safety. In the wake of a major rebellion in chapter 16 of Numbers, the divine promise is entirely reversed in a complaint addressed to Moshe. It is not enough that you brought us up from a land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness, that you should also lord it over us? Hama'at ki ha'elutanu me'eretz zavat chalav u'dvash lahamitenu bamidbar ki tishtarer aleinu gam histarer. When the eyes of the Israelite, Mitzrayim, Egypt, is a place flowing with milk and honey, not the land of Canaan? What's going on here? Despite witnessing how their oppressors were miraculously plagued again and again, despite a sea splitting before their very eyes and walking through that sea to freedom on the other side, despite standing at Sinai and hearing divine revelation, despite being sustained with manna from heaven throughout their wandering in the wilderness, they regress again and again, resorting to crisis, complaint, and blame. Regressing to the diminished consciousness of Mitzrayim, to narrowness, losing faith in the divine enterprise, in the promise. It seems to be that inhabiting the wilderness, the wide open spaces of the Midbar, is so destabilizing that they again and again yearn for an old story, an old way of being. A place that is comfortably narrow, a place of constraint. So I was reading about a psychological model that might help explain this. I know there are actually psychologists here, so you'll tell me later if I'm correct in describing this. But there's an idea, there's a notion of primary and secondary consciousness. Primary consciousness is the consciousness we had as small children, right? The expression you can hear, the free, spontaneous, unself-conscious expression. We often see it on the face of a baby, pure awe, a sense of safety and radical belonging, of interconnectedness, of pure love and innocence, of trust that they will be taken care of. It's a consciousness, according to this model, that continues to exist within us as adults, but mostly it's obscured, covered over by what is called secondary consciousness. That's the consciousness that analyzes, predicts, manipulates the world around us. It's a survival mechanism that allows us to shape our reality and navigate the complexity of the world. The primary consciousness of innocence, of love, of safety, of belonging is still there, but it's covered over. We're so focused on survival, on success. We are often so fear-driven that we suppress the deeper nature of our very reality, of being interconnected, of being made from love, of being created in the holy image of the divine. And in fact, those who have experienced abuse and trauma often have an over-functioning secondary consciousness, a rigid sense of identity, a less permeable ego structure, and even a depressive personality which doesn't let the light in. In other words, if we are victims of trauma or abuse, we need a sense of continuity in identity. We need to keep our sense of self small. We continue to live in a narrow channel in Mitzrayim, blocking out the expanse of consciousness we had access to as a child. This model can indeed explain how the Israelites hold on to an old sense of identity. They are searching for an experience that's consistent with their past, with their experience in Mitzrayim of being constrained and exploited and shut down. They have no idea how to orient to this new reality of the wilderness experience, of God's love and care, and instead of that experience reassuring them and giving them a sense of deepened faith, it creates a sense of crisis, a desire to blame, a yearning for the past. But there is a shining exception in this week's Parsha. In Pinchas, 5 women, 5 sisters who do something different. They represent an opposite trajectory, a forward instead of a backwards motion that so radically disrupts the regular pattern of the wilderness experience that it's almost hard to believe that their story belongs in this book. It's the story of the daughters of Slavchad. Their names are Noah, Milcah, Hoglah, Tirzah, and Machlah. Maybe you'll remember them. Here's their story. Their father, whose name's Slavchad, dies. They have no brothers, no males to inherit land. And because the world of the Torah is patriarchal, there is no mechanism for daughters to inherit. It's a problem because they actually want a stake in the promised land. They're actually looking forward. So what do? The Torah tells us. They come close, vatikravna, and they stand, vata'amodna, before Moses, before Eleazar the priest, before the chieftains, and before the whole assembly. These 5 women get up uninvited and stand before the entire people of Israel. Wow. Crazy courage, audacity. Standing before the entire nation, they lay their case down before the people saying, our father died in the wilderness. He was not one of the faction, of Korach's faction, which banded together against Adonai, but he died for his own sin, and he has left no sons. Why should our father's name be lost to his clan just because he had no sons? Give us a holding among our father's kinsmen. Lama yigara shem avinu mitoch mishpachto ki ein lo ben tna lanu achuza betoch achei avinu. They make a claim. They even make a demand. Moses hears their plea and has no idea what to do. Maybe he isn't used to women making demands. In any case, there is no precedent to this case, and so he approaches God. And God says, once Moshe explains what's going on, God says yes. God, who's so often angry at God's people when they make requests and demands, so often annoyed at their inability to grasp the divine promise, is thrilled. Thrilled that finally someone actually wants to go forward and claim a stake in the promised land. God says, Kain benot Slofchad dovrot. Yes, the daughters of Slofchad speak rightly and rightfully. Yes, you are to give them a hereditary holding in the midst of their father's brothers. A divine yes to 5 women, 5 sisters. But God goes even further. God shifts the entire patriarchal force field and says to the children of Israel, any man, when he dies and a son he does not have, you are to transfer his inheritance to his daughter. Again, wow. The daughters of Slofchad make a claim for themselves, but in insisting on their own legacy, they affect an entire people. It's even more amazing when you think about their father's name, Slofchad, which means in the shadow of fear. He, like the rest of that generation, is living in the shadow of fear. I wonder about our own moment of shadow and fear. How do we connect to the promise of living in a place, in a state of consciousness of flow? Eretz Zavad, Chalav, Udvash means a land flowing with milk and honey. How can we live in awe and mystery, in primary consciousness? Is that possible? The names of the 5 daughters of Slofchad show us what is possible even when living in the shadow of fear. Consider their meaning. Mochla means forgiveness. Tirza means delight. Noah means movement. Chogla, dance. Milka, royalty. Each one representing maybe a state of flow. Their father, living in the shadow of fear, could not quite live into the promise, but remarkably, he could imagine that his daughters would. And even though we as a people come by a trauma identity, honestly, the Torah tells us in no uncertain terms, we are not to stay stuck in our own narrow stories, in victim consciousness. In the narrow place of Mitzrayim, the Torah invites us into a bigger story. A shining promise calls, a promise of flow and abundance, a land of milk and honey. It's not just a place, it's a state of consciousness, of holiness. Leaving Mitzrayim does not happen once. We are invited into a process of leaving Mitzrayim again and again, no matter how constrained our reality is. The call of the promised land remains. It is a call, I'd like to suggest, to primary consciousness, to a state of flow. I believe that is sacred consciousness, which is also consciousness of the sacred. It's always calling to us that primary consciousness to awe, to interconnectedness, to love, to a sense of mystery, to belonging, to security, calling us from under the fear of shadow, calling us to the promise of flow, the flow of sweet milk and honey, of abundance. May we all be so blessed.